It's been such a long time since I updated my personal rig, but with a computer like this, it's certainly been worth the wait. Now I play a lot of games. This is not a mere showpiece, and it'll easily crush 4K gaming with smooth 60 frames per second performance in pretty much every game I've tested so far. So nice try Xbox, but the One X, it ain't got nothing on this rig. Now the parts featured are pretty much things I've been researching for the last few months, as I've really tried to nail down stuff that's not only going to perform well, but is going to be really quiet too. It all starts with the processor, as I have a lot of pixels to process in every sense of the word. I've gone for a 10-core Intel i9-7900X, as it's just as happy rendering out PC Centric videos as it is punishing looters in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or, you know, watching my teammates go on without me after I've died. Cooling is a tricky one though, as the 7900X puts out a frankly silly amount of heat. Thankfully though, it seems that Corsair has the answer with the new H150i. It uses the triple 120mm standard for not only fantastic cooling, but to keep noise to a minimum too. As for motherboards, there's actually quite a lot to choose from in the X299 range, so getting the right one wasn't actually the easiest decision. The one I went for though is the Asus X299i Strix motherboard, as it strikes the right sort of balance between appearance, features, connectivity and ultimately costs. It's been very stable so far, even when overclocking, and it has useful features like an M.2 heatsink, addressable RGB headers and USB 3.1 in all flavours. On the RAM front, I think it's pretty much got to be fast, and it's got to be RGB. And there are a few different kits that meet this criteria, but the one I went for in the end was the XPG Spectrix from Adata. This 32GB kit is clocked at 3000 MHz, and it really does look fantastic regardless whether it's on or off. I think the red colour might put some people off, I know it did me at first, but actually once it's in your system it really does look great, and it can even be controlled with Aura Sync as well. Now obviously the most exciting bit of any gaming PC is going to be the graphics card, and the one I've got here is my trusty 1080 Ti Poseidon from Asus. And it's the fastest non-Titan that Asus sell. It comes pre-overclocked, so it will pretty much take down any game you can throw at it regardless of settings or resolution. It's definitely a looker too, with its lovely metal finish front and back, and then that infinite RGB mirror that's very much love it or hate it. The card can be hooked up to a custom water cooling loop, which I'll actually be doing in the coming weeks, so follow PC Centric on Instagram if you want a little behind the scenes sneak peek. When it comes to storage though, there's pretty much only one option if you want the absolute fastest thing available, and it's the Samsung 960 Pro. It uses the NVMe standard for frankly ridiculous read and write speeds, and if you want to edit raw 4K video or simply watch games load in mind-bogglingly short times, this is for you. It's certainly not cheap though, especially the 1TB version, but when it comes to raw speed, there's nothing else quite like it. I am also using a secondary SSD for that little bit extra storage, and things like multiplayer games will now install on the now discontinued Crucial MX100. But don't worry, I'll leave a link to the updated version of this, as well as all the parts featured in this video, in the description should you be interested. Now obviously we're going to need a power supply to get this thing up and running, and my priority is always something that's not only got enough wattage, is fully modular, but ultimately remains very silent even under high load. I didn't have to look very far, as I'm using my trusty Corsair HX1200i. And it's always been good to me. I've never had any failures with any Corsair power supplies, which is not the same for some other brands. And I know 1200 watts is definitely more than I'll need here, but it does allow me to grab a second graphics card a little bit later if I want to, and this will all be while maintaining that silent computer that I really am after. As it's fully modular, I've also swapped out the cables for something a little bit more jazzy in the blue and white braided flavour. Now in my experience, a PC build very rarely goes perfectly, and yes, hands in the air, I did cock up a little bit, and this time it was with the fans. So you see, the original plan was to use the Corsair LL RGB spinners, but then I realised that I was using a 360mm radiator and my fans were 140mm, so I had to swap them out for some LL series fans, but I only had 3, didn't I, which means that somewhere on my computer I had to have a fan that was unilluminated, which I decided to put at the top. But if you're doing something similar in this case, don't do what I did, buy 4 of these fans. Cooling mishap aside though, I think the build went rather well, as while it did take a little longer than I would have liked, everything was quite simple, straightforward and easy to work with. The case I'm using here is the Corsair Spec Omega, which I really like, and it just sort of looks completely different to your average computer case and almost strikes me as a more modern day NZXT Phantom. It was really easy to build inside, and I ended up plopping the radiator at the front in a sort of push configuration, but do be careful if you do this, as I did need to remove the hard drive cage to actually make all my hardware fit inside. Cable management was a little bit tricky as well, but I did get there in the end. It's mainly those RGB fans that add 2 boxes and you just end up with a load of cables. But the end result did look very, very good. I would use the word stunning, with the tempered glass window really showing off the internals oh so well, despite the lack of any sort of basement. But realistically, it's not all about looks. I need something that has the performance to actually make my day-to-day life that little bit easier and to power through some 4K gaming. And I have been using this configuration for the last few months, and it is powered through everything, and I've been nothing but impressed. Synthetically, we've got the highest scores I've seen from a single card, and despite the concerningly few air gaps on the front of the case, temperatures on the CPU and GPU are actually under control at 66 and 75 degrees respectively. As for the real world numbers, they're just as impressive, with averages over 60 frames a second at 4K Ultra in all but one title I've tested. I've played about 130 hours of PUBG on this card, and it can really power through absolutely any situation. AMD Threadripper may be better in certain workloads, but the i9 reigns supreme when it comes to gaming. Speaking of workloads though, this is of course where that 10-core CPU really does come into its own, and I've been rendering and creating a lot of H.264 4K video files, and it absolutely crushes it in pretty much all scenarios. Cinebench scores are well into the 2000s, even before you overclock, and in my individual workflow, I edit, grade and render in Resolve, and it's been absolutely fantastic. In terms of render time, it can output 1 minute of 4K footage in a rather swift 56 seconds. That's faster than real time. As for overclocking, you can push the 7900X as well if you want, with a fair bit extra performance to gain. Temperatures are the normal concern, but the H150i is actually a pretty good candidate for all-in-one solutions. I'm personally holding back my chip a little bit as I want complete silence, but you can expect to get all cores running well past 4 GHz if you favour performance over fan noise. So then, this is my new personal rig. I know there's a few more tweaks that I do need to make to it, but I'm actually really happy with how it's come out, the way it looks, ultimately the way it performs. I'll leave all of the lists of parts and stuff down in the description below for you if you want to know current pricing and things like that, because I know everyone's always asking. But if you do want to see a full setup as well, with all of this stuff, with everything I use on a daily basis, that should be coming next week, but if it's available now, it'll be in the top right hand corner. But I won't keep you any longer. I hope you've enjoyed this video. A massive thank you to Asus ROG for sponsoring the channel, and everyone that's provided parts over the years that has managed to go into this rig. And I'll see you in the next video.